Mr. Senna is happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Mr. Senna, which of your fellow competitors do you admire most, and why?
One of the greatest drivers of all times is Fangio. Not only because he won 5 times the world title, but because of his attitude.
He was able to do it at the age of 47, which I think probably in modern cars would not be practical or possible. I think it was easier in some ways because it was a sport and therefore one did it for love and passion. And more difficult because the cars were not quite as good as they are today and things could let you down.
But Fangio, here shown away from the track, is suddenly to disappear. Kidnapped at pistol point by Cuban rebels.
A world champion in the circuit, but also a real gentleman outside racing cars. So for that reason, I am a great fan of him and I admire him a lot.
Modern Formula One, a world of high-tech racing machines powered by computers, pushed forward by technology. Its drivers are seen as gods, the very peak of motorsports. But what if we took away the safety features, the army of technicians and software engineers? What if we gave them a shell of a car, a steering wheel, and a helmet? How many of them could go on to win not 1, not 2, but 5 world championships? We would argue none of them could, because to do that, you would have to be a master, and there is only one El Maestro. We were of course talking about the one and only Manuel Fangio. His journey from humble beginnings to becoming one of the most revered figures in racing is nothing short of legendary. But just how good was Juan Manuel Fangio? Well, let's find out, because my name is Alex and you're watching QuattroCam. Born in Argentina in 1911, Juan Manuel's passion for cars started young. He wasn't just a driver, he was a mechanic, allowing him to understand the machines he would come to call home. He was so confident in his passion for auto mechanics that he completely abandoned his studies at the tender age of 13. And luckily for him, he had parents that allowed him to pursue this love at the expense of getting a formal education. It would be just 3 short years when the then 16-year-old Juan Manuel would get his first taste of motor racing. Unfortunately, this was cut short after he developed pneumonia that saw him bedridden for 2 months. The setbacks did not end there, however. Once he had recovered, he was required to enlist in the military for his country's compulsory military service. Luckily for Juan Manuel, his driving skills came in handy. He was appointed as the commanding officer's official driver, giving him the opportunity to improve his driving skills. Understandably, once he was discharged from the military, Juan Manuel opened his own garage and started participating in local racing events in 1936. In his first race, he drove a 1929 Ford Model A that he had rebuilt by himself. So quite early on, it was obvious that there was something very special about this guy. Not only was he there to race, but he was also rebuilding his own cars himself. It wasn't all plain sailing, however. Juan Manuel had his fair share of mechanical issues, with one even leading to a disqualification that nearly ended his racing career before it had really begun. Inspired by his friends, he would return. Juan Manuel would switch to another American brand when he entered the Argentine Road Grand Prix in 1938. He drove his Chevrolet to a 5th place finish that year, a solid performance from the young driver. He would return in 1940, and this time he would walk away with the victory, his first but by no means his last. Just so that you can appreciate how monumentous this win was, the 1940 Gran Premio del Norte was almost 10,000 kilometers long. Competitors started in Buenos Aires on the 27th of September, riding through the Andes and Bolivia to Lima, Peru, and then back to Buenos Aires. a 15-day journey. On top of this, the conditions were terrible. They were driving through deserts, insect-infested jungles, and snow-covered mountains. And as if this wasn't enough, Fangio and his teammate battled multiple car malfunctions that saw them lose time over their rivals. So the fact that a relative newcomer won that race should have signaled to everybody at the time that he wasn't there to play. The next year, Juan Manuel decided to sign up for the Grand Prix in Brazil. Mercifully, it was just 6 days and was a public road race. So knowing what conditions he drove under in the previous year, it's probably not surprising that he beat Oscar Galvez, one of the best drivers at the time, to take home the trophy. So why exactly was he given the nickname El Maestro? Well, it's mainly for his exploits in a little competition called Formula One.
Fangio, second Moss. Fangio is keeping up a fantastic average speed, now over 120 miles an hour. And as always, Moss is right there behind him.
Juan Manuel entered the inaugural Formula One competition, the FIA World Championship of Drivers, in 1950, which in itself was a big deal. He wasn't the youngest or the greenest. In fact, he was the oldest, and that actually came with some challenges. You see, Formula One in the 50s was not what it is now. Imagine all the challenges faced by modern Formula One drivers. Now remove their dietitians, sports therapists, race engineers, every sensor, camera and computer, and strap them into a bathtub on wheels. The races were physically and mentally demanding, and the cars were a hell of a lot scarier. Now imagine being in your 30s and doing all of that in a competition with people in their early 20s. You can see this today with how some of the older drivers move down the field as they age, being replaced by ever younger hotshots. For most, this would have been enough to end their racing careers. But this is not any old racer. This is Juan Manuel Fangio. He showed everybody that age was just a number. The experience and adaptability that he had learnt competing in the Argentine Grand Prix definitely came in handy. But he didn't win that first competition. He did, however, go on to win the World Championship of Drivers competition 5 different times. This is a record that stood for almost 50 years until a certain Michael Schumacher broke it in 2003. Let's just go over that one last time. In the 1950s, when drivers were left to their own devices on track, with cars that resembled flying coffins, and death was part of their everyday life, Juan Manuel set a record that stood untouched, even by the likes of Clark, Brabham, Stewart, Lauda, Piquet, Senna, and Prost. If you saw our video on Senna and you know your stuff, you might say, well, Senna and Clark both sadly died whilst racing, so you cannot mention them here, but that's exactly why we can. Juan Manuel Fangio managed to achieve this feat in the same death traps as those other great drivers. The fact he didn't die is a miracle, and he still remains the only driver in F1 history to win titles with 4 different teams. Unlike many drivers, especially today, Fangio did not believe in sticking with a team for the entirety of his career. He switched from Alfa Romeo to Maserati to Mercedes and then to Ferrari, winning championships with each team. One switch we hope you'll make is from someone who isn't subscribed to somebody who is. We're on a mission to hit 15,000 subscribers by the end of this year, so be sure to subscribe to the channel and help us reach this goal together. Now back to our last point. Imagine if Lewis Hamilton wins a record 8th world title with Ferrari in 2025. He would only have done it for 3 constructors. He would have to make yet another switch in 2026 and win again to match Fangio's achievement. This goes to show that regardless of the car, Juan Manuel Fangio was the fastest driver at any track he set foot on. He also did not have free rein either. In the 2 seasons Juan Manuel did not win, the title went to Alberto Ascari, a driver we plan to cover in another video. Ascari remains, along with Michael Schumacher, Ferrari's only back-to-back world champions. So Juan Manuel definitely had his work cut out for him. Altogether, Fangio earned 5 titles in just 7 seasons. And even though this particular record has since been broken, the fact that he created the record when motorsports was a lot more dangerous than it currently is has meant that Fangio continues to hold the title of the greatest driver of all time for many. Even Schumacher himself, on the day that he broke the record, is quoted as saying, "Fangio is on a level much higher than I see myself. What he did stands alone, and what we have achieved is also unique. I have such respect for what he achieved. You can't take a personality like Fangio and compare him with what we have today. There is not even the slightest comparison." So don't just take our word for it. Schumacher also thought the same. If you require any more evidence on Fangio's greatness, look no further than the Nürburgring in 1957. He sat in the seat of a Maserati 250F, a great car for sure, but not without its issues. During practice before the race, the car was burning through tyres. The team did not have time to fix it, so they had to plan a fast multiple pit stop strategy to give Fangio a chance. They got the changes down to 30 seconds, pretty remarkable for the time, as Fangio took a 30-second lead over second place into one of these well-rehearsed stops. But all was not well. When Fangio re-emerged onto the track, he had not been in the pits for 30 seconds. He had not been in the pits for 60. Fangio had lost 78 seconds. It was a disaster. The Ferraris of Mike Hawthorne and Peter Collins sat first and second. Fangio sat 51 seconds behind them, and he only had 10 laps left to race. He had to take a risk. Fangio began the deadly task of upping his cornering speed. A mistake back then at those speeds would have killed him. Fangio was heading into each corner a gear up than normal, carrying the extra speed through each bend. It was a much faster approach, but it was far from safe, something most drivers at the time would not have risked. Then, in one of the downhills, Fangio saw the other two cars. They were one behind the other, and there was only 2 laps left to go. But Fangio had a problem. His seat had come unscrewed, using one of his legs and causing immense pain. He pinned the seat in place and hunted down the Ferraris. Fangio set a lap record on that final lap, beating the lap record, which he had also set the lap previously, which was a lap record he had also set from the lap before. All in all, Fangio set 10 lap records in those final 10 laps, beating his own record time and time again. Before the race, Fangio held the lap record at 9 minutes and 41.6 seconds. By the end of those 10 laps, it was now set at 9 minutes and 25.3 seconds, shaving off more than a second every lap. This would be El Maestro's 3rd Nürburgring victory, but it was bittersweet. In 1954, Fangio had taken Onofre Marimon to the circuit to practice for the upcoming Grand Prix. Marimon's Maserati left the Nürburgring racecourse at the Breitscheid. He was going fast on a downgrade, but failed to negotiate a sharp turn at the bottom. Marimon impacted a ditch, his Maserati shearing off a tree and rolling over multiple times. He was pinned underneath the car as it came to a rest on its top, with the wheels still spinning in the air. Marimon was given the last rites by a Catholic priest. It was thought that his braking unit had failed. It would be Fangio's last GP win, retiring the next year because he had given his all and managed to walk away with his life. All of that said, Juan Manuel's legacy goes beyond mere numbers. He was a gentleman racer, respected by his peers and admired by fans. His sportsmanship was almost as legendary as his driving skills, something other racing greats are often criticised for. His reputation was so strong that during his final race before he retired, Mike Hawthorne, who was winning the race, decided to brake to allow Juan Manuel to cross the finish line before him. Hawthorne still won that race, but this show of respect to the old guard is not something that has been seen since. However, as life has shown us time and time again, bad things happen to good people. In 1957, Fangio competed in and won the non-Formula One Cuban Grand Prix in Havana, which the president of Cuba had just established. He was set to compete in the 1958 competition and had even set the fastest time during the practice. But on the 23rd of February 1958, he was kidnapped by 2 gunmen of Fidel Castro's 26th of July movement. President Batista insisted that the race continue, and so it did. Meanwhile, Fangio was taken to 3 different safe houses during the entire ordeal. Thankfully, his kidnap lasted only 29 hours, and according to him, he was treated very well. The captors had tried to get Batista to cancel the race, but that didn't work, so they just returned Juan Manuel to the Argentine embassy as soon as the race was over. He got to watch the race while in captivity though, so that was something. Now if that comes as a surprise, don't worry, we plan on covering this in greater detail in a later video. In the wake of his retirement, Fangio was still never far away from his first love. He sold Mercedes-Benz cars and occasionally drove his former racing car in demonstration laps. He was even appointed president of Mercedes-Benz Argentina in 1974, an honorary president for life in 1987. He was a man without fault, a driver without comparison, a gentleman racer until the end, and a true role model for those that followed. Fangio died in Buenos Aires in 1995 at the age of 84 from kidney failure and pneumonia. He would be buried in his hometown. His pallbearers included fellow racing icons Sterling Moss and Jackie Stewart, and one can only speculate the late great Ayrton Senna would have joined them if not for the tragic events of 1994. Such was his admiration and love for his fellow South American. Even today, you cannot talk about all-time greats in any sport without talking about Juan Manuel Fangio. He was the first. He was a trailblazer. He survived the deadliest time in racing history, set records that the greatest drivers of the next 5 decades could not match, and retired from the sport as a true hero with an impeccable reputation. So just how good was Juan Manuel Fangio? Why don't you tell us? Let us know in the comments what you think about Juan Manuel Fangio. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Afterwards, you can go over that way and check out our Senna video, amongst many others that we have on the channel. We cover a wide range of topics, so we're sure you won't be disappointed.